Welcome to section 7.6, Ratio, Proportion, and Other Applied Problems. This is our final section in chapter 7. Specifically, we're now going to take what we learned in 7.5 about solving rational equations, and now we're going to solve them. But some key terms to kind of get us started. What is a ratio? Well, a ratio really just means it's a fraction. In fact, and this will come back up in the future, a rational number means any number that can be written as a fraction. So ratio is typically is just a fraction. It's a comparison of two numbers, 3 to 1, 2 to 4, etc. A proportion, it really is a ratio, but it's more talking about ratios that are equivalent. Sometimes they're used interchangeably, and depending on the scenario, that may be true, but there is a subtle difference in general. So when we start talking about solving a proportion, what it means is we're going to solve something like this, where notice I have two fractions, and I want them to be equal fractions. So I got to find x to make this an equal fraction. Well, the way we can do this is look at this and realize this is a rational expression, just like you solved in 7.5. So I want you to pause the video and just solve it as you would in 7.5. Well, hopefully, as you approach this problem, you realize that I can solve it because I need a lowest common denominator. So what's the lowest common denominator? It's 20. So I multiply both sides by 20. Then we simply multiply together. 20 divided by 4 is 5. 20 divided by 10 is 2. Multiply those, and I get 90 equals 2x divided by 2, and x equals 45. That actually makes perfect sense because just come back here, even if we don't plug it in, which number is bigger? Well, 18 is bigger than 4, so I would expect this number up here to come out to be much bigger than 10. So let's try this again. I want you to solve this proportion in a similar manner. Go ahead and pause the video and solve it. Well, hopefully, as you did that, one of the first things you probably ran into is the fact that it's kind of hard to find the lowest common denominator in this current form. But what does it mean? This is really a fraction divided by a fraction, because remember, fractions are just division. So a fraction divided by a fraction, how do you divide fractions? Well, I take the first one, and I multiply by reciprocal. So flip the second one, you get 5/2. Multiply those together. Now can you find the lowest common denominator? If you do, it's 6, because 3 goes into 6. So we multiply both sides by 6, and we get repetition, and then we end up with 2 times 5 equals n, or n equals 10. And that makes sense because again, 1/3 is bigger than 1/5. So we kind of put those things there. Now, a brief comment about something called cross multiplication. Your textbook talks about this and focuses on it. That is a subcase of everything we did in 7.5. So it is a situation that only works when there's no addition and subtraction going over here, no addition and subtraction. I just have a fraction equals a fraction. And in that case, you can multiply this denominator times that numerator, this denominator times that numerator. I'll say that 5 times fast. So multiply the opposite crosses, that's where it comes from. And I'd say 6 times 3 is 2, and 1/5 times n is 1/5 n, but then the opposite of dividing by 1/5, multiply by 5, and we end up back here in this singular spot. I would recommend this method in general because it really is the critical idea, foundational idea, and it reinforces what you already did in 7.5. I'll help you out in that regard. So let's continue on to some more examples. Specifically, let's talk about some applications, both proportions and rational expressions in general. So in this particular case, I have Tom. He wants to waterproof his deck. It's a 17 square foot deck. And he knows that he can waterproof 450 square feet using 2 gallons of sealant. So the question is, how many gallons does he need? Well, there's lots of different ways we can come at this problem. First, though, let's just come at it the same way we've done all the others. So let's start with the question of what am I looking for? Well, we're looking for gallons, G. Now, can you list down the information that you are given? Go ahead and write the information that you're given. Probably the first thing you noticed when you're writing that down was 450 square feet is 2 gallons. And 700 square feet is, I don't know how many gallons, some number, right? Specifically, it would be equal to G. So using that, notice I can just literally draw a line underneath them and go 450 over 1700, except square feet over square feet and gallons over gallons. So I can just write this right here in that manner. Over here, I have the same thing. This is a ratio, 450 to 2 gallons. That's on one side. And this, so notice, gallons are on the bottom, square feet are on the top. So your units will always either line up on the same side or across the top, across the bottom. Your units need to line up so they cancel out. Now, there's also, you can do the reciprocal of either one of these that I came up with. So you could end up with 1700 over 450 and G over 2, or 2 over 450 and G over 1700. I don't want to get into all those. So there's 4 different possible scenarios. Personally, I'm just going to pick this first one. So I like to take them, and when I have ratios like this, and just do it straight down. So to me, it's easier that way. From this situation, how do I solve it? So just go back to how we solved proportions previously. Well, we found a lowest common denominator. In this case, it's 1700 G. So if I multiply both sides by 1700 G, notice I get 450 G and 1700 times 2. For those who are doing cross multiplication, that's exactly what you get, 450 times G and 2 times 1700. Multiply that out, divide by 450. Okay, that's nice. That doesn't look pretty. Well, the first thing I notice when I'm looking at this is I can divide 10 from both of them. And if I take 10 out, I can also take a 5 out of that. And so I get, if I take 50 out of here, I get 9. Take 50 out of here, I get 68. Well, 3 and 9 do not go in 68, so I can't reduce that anymore. So our answer is that Tom needs 68 ninths of gallons of sealant. I mean, you can, now obviously not everything's sold in ninths of a gallon. We don't know if they sell it in quarts, if it's a partial gallon, how they sell it, how we can get access to it. Even something that says it's 5 gallons isn't usually 5 gallons. If you read in detail, it's actually a small fraction. So please remember, this is a math class. I want you to be exact. If it tells you to round up, you're welcome to round up to the nearest gallon. But in general, I want you to be exact. Let's do another example of proportions. Specifically, let's do a geometric example. So I have 2 triangles. All right, to help out with that, let's just draw 2 triangles. Boom, here's my 2 triangles. And notice I went ahead and took a moment and I labeled them. So this thing AB means that the edge from A to B is 12 inches, and from BC, 16 inches. Same thing here. So similar, by the way, means that they are proportional. Their lengths or sides are proportional. So I want you to take a second and I want you to think of what is a proportion that you can come up with. In this particular case, based on the picture that I drew. Well, one possible option is I got 16 over 12. So I got 16 over 12. Now think about it. Notice A, B are the first 2 letters in this thing, and D, E are the first 2 letters here, which means those, when we're talking about similar triangles, it means these lengths are proportionally to each other. So if I have 12 on top, I got 2 options. I have 20 or I have X to go on the top. Well, because it's in the same order, that's 20, and then the X just takes the last spot. So if you have if you pick 2 of the values, the other 2 can kind of come naturally out of this. Now I want you to go ahead and pause the video and solve that rational equation. Well, as you did that, you can multiply by 16x, which is the lowest common denominator, or cross multiply. And if I do that, I get 12x equals 20 times 16, which is 12x equals 320. So x, now divide, you get to 80 thirds. So our answer is that final side would be 80 thirds of x, inches. So again, we just kind of, we draw pictures, we kind of try to highlight all the different parts and put it all together. All right, that's the end of this first part. I'm going to move on and do more examples in the second part of the video, specifically referring to how to deal with work and rate problems.